Hi everyone, Kellen Rouse here. Back to talk more about my EMDR journey. So yesterday I did, I think it's now my fifth session of EMDR. This time dealing with, continuing to deal with something that we kind of started on last time, which is connected to the sexual abuse that I experienced as a child. This time wasn't processing the actual abuse, but the thing that I think we're finding has traumatized me even worse, that I talked about in my last video a bit, which was not being believed by the people who should have been protecting me, and how that really affected my somewhat my view of myself, but even more so my worldview, about whether or not I trust people, how I can trust people, whether people are trustworthy. And this ended up being a very, very intense session that ended up taking me to a lot of different places and a lot of different memories. But I do feel like that it was an extremely productive session. So I'm going to go back to giving you a little bit of a description of the session as I was doing before. I think in my last video I didn't really go into details about it. But for this session, what we did is we again started with the visualization and the sort of negative thing that I had learned or started to believe because of the incident in question. So in order for you to understand this, let me give you just a little bit of background without a lot of detail. When I was 11 years old, I was molested by my stepfather, and about a week later, I told my mother about this. My mother confronted her then husband and my stepfather, and of course he denied it, because that's what molesters do. It's not like he's going to come out and be like, yes, I'm totally molesting your daughter. And my mom chose to believe him and told me that she did not believe me, and that basically I should keep my mouth shut, because if I started telling people about this kind of stuff, that like I would break up the family. I can't remember even all the things that she said, but basically, you know, that there would be consequences for the whole family if I decided to go on with my lies. So that, of course, was shocking, and, you know, really, I think was a turning point for me. I really feel like that's when I stopped being a child, because I knew for sure from that point on that I absolutely could not depend on any of the adults in my life to protect me, even though that had been made abundantly clear over and over again. There was like a breaking point for me there at 11. It's after that I have a few years where my memories are fuzzy. I have sort of flashes of memory here and there. I know that things happened. I even have legal documents pertaining to that time, but my linear memory is lost for about 2.5, almost 3 years from about that point on. This affected me so badly that I blocked out the next 2 to 3 years, and I haven't still really had access to those memories, and I'm still trying to figure out whether I want access to those memories. I kind of do, but then again, I'm also wondering, you know, what is my mind protecting me from? So anyways, so like many people who have experienced trauma, the next things that I'm going to tell you are flashes that I have and just things that I know happened, but I can't remember exactly how. I don't remember the circumstances surrounding them, or exactly how this came to be, but somehow within the next year, my dad found out about this. And I think what happened is that I told my grandmother, my mother's mother, and I think my grandmother told my dad. I'm pretty sure that's what happened, but I don't remember, and my dad and my grandmother both have passed away since that time. So, but what I do remember is my dad coming and getting me and my sister and taking us to Houston, and trying to enroll us in school. My mom tried to have him charged with kidnapping, because technically he did come and get us and take us out of state, outside of his visitation. My parents were divorced, had been divorced since I was 5. And so that is when all of the court stuff ensued. And that went on for about 2 years. So at first, we tried to bring a criminal case against my stepfather, but he would not, because of the laws, as I mentioned in my last video, the DA would not bring a criminal charge because it was my word against him. And the laws then, and probably the laws now, and the laws in a lot of places in our country, as I mentioned last time, are that you either have to have multiple victims or you have to have a victim and a witness, so that it's not a he said, she said situation. Because it was just my word against his, and of course he was continuing to deny it, I testified before a grand jury. The DA, grand jury, I'm not sure how that works, but they work together somehow to decide whether they're going to bring a case. They decided that they couldn't bring a case because there wasn't enough evidence. So at that point, it turned into a civil custody case against my mom and my dad, against my dad and my mom, my dad being the plaintiff and my mom being the defendant. And so he was suing for full custody of me and my sister. My sister was, by that time I was 12 and my sister was 10. So I was interviewed by at least one social worker, and as part of the court proceedings, instead of having me go and testify on the bench, they pulled me into the judge's chambers, and I talked about this in my last video as well. They pulled me into the judge's chambers and they questioned me. And I was being questioned by a bunch of older white men. The only female in the room was the court reporter. I had no advocate. I had my dad's lawyer, but I didn't know my dad's lawyer. And they're asking me extremely personal questions that would be like embarrassing and scary for, anyone, but particularly, a 12-year-old girl who has been pretty sheltered, and they were asking me questions, really specific questions about my story, and I guess my answers didn't satisfy them because I have court documents that say that the social worker, the judge, and some other official person who's title I can't remember, were having a hard time believing my story, and that basically there wasn't enough evidence for them to find that I had been molested. My dad kept fighting for us, fortunately, and he had the means to do so. He ended up dropping tens of thousands of dollars on this custody case, and thank goodness he was a successful entrepreneur and had the money to do that, because if he didn't, I don't know what would have happened to me, honestly. I don't know if I would still be here if I had been stuck in that situation. So he continued to fight for us, and about a year and a half later, somewhere around there, my younger sister came forward. My stepfather's daughter, my stepsister, caught him molesting my little sister. And we went, there were 4 of us girls. There were 2 of them were his children from a previous marriage, and then there was me and my sister from my mom's previous marriage. And we were all around the same age. We were all within about 2.5 years of each other. So the 3 girls basically pressured my sister into coming forward, because I knew that if she came forward that the case would be over. And she finally was able to find the strength to do this. And, I found out later that she, like many young girls who were being molested, had been being threatened by my stepfather, threatened that something would happen to the family, that she would be taken away from her mother, just all kinds of things. It's just horrible things that, pedophiles and abusers do to groom their victims. And so she was able to find the strength finally to come forward. And with her testimony, the court then found that there was more than enough evidence to find that we had been sexually molested, and awarded custody to my dad. There was, for some reason at that point, and I don't know why, I don't know if it was just because maybe my dad didn't want to continue with the court, he like got custody of us, he got us out of the situation, or I don't know why this happened. But I've always wondered why at that point, when there were two witnesses, there wasn't a criminal case that would go forward. But regardless, there was never a criminal case. My abuser's name is Michael Lee Rogers. He is somewhere in his 60s. He lives in a tiny piece of shit town in Mississippi called McLean, Mississippi. And he is still a free man. And I have no idea whether he went on to continue molesting girls. I know that he had molested girls before me. I know that he impregnated his first wife when he was, I believe, 19 and she was 14. So this is a pattern with him. And I'm sure that he went on to continue molesting little girls because the courts refused to believe me. So all that backstory I've given you so that you understand sort of the nature of this trauma and how victims of trauma, and in this case sexual abuse trauma, can have these sort of flashes of memory, but not really necessarily remember all of the circumstances surrounding it, or even be able to put it into a sequential order. The only reason that I have the sequential order that I have is because I have the court papers. So I can go and look at the court papers and be like, okay, on this date, this was filed. On this date, this was filed. These were the people who were subpoenaed to come in and talk. I have that documentation, and I've held on to that I actually sought it out a few years ago with my sister. We went to the Greene County Courthouse in Mississippi, and they found the case, and we paid for them to photocopy all of the court papers for us. And I've never been able to get any papers from the DA over there. I've asked them for them several times, and they always give me the runaround because I want whatever documentation that there is of the criminal case as well, or what didn't go through as a criminal case, the beginnings of the criminal case. So this has been something that has affected me majorly for my entire life since then, and I believe that so I had to visualize something during the EMDR session, and I visualized the courtroom. Because even though my mom was the first one not to believe me, and generally you want to go with that memory, my strongest association is being, not the courtroom, I'm sorry, the judge's chambers, is being in the judge's chambers. Because for me, at that point, I knew that there was something wrong with my mom, and I knew that it wasn't me, that there was something going on in my family, something going on with my mom. But I had this trust that the legal system, the judicial system, would see through that and would believe me and do something. And it was after they didn't believe me, on top of my mom not believing me, that I lost all faith in being able to trust authority figures. And so my visualization was the judge's chambers, and the negative thought with that was that I am insignificant. And that, that no matter what I do, no matter how brave I am, that I'm insignificant, that people aren't going to believe me. But we just went with I am insignificant. There were several statements that matched up, but this one seemed to hit home the most. So we went through the process, where you're visualizing that, and then you notice what you're feeling, where you're feeling it in the body, and you let it happen. And my mind ended up going to a lot of different places. It ended up going to, the situation with my mom not believing me. It ended up going to my sadness and a certain amount of guilt that I have about the fact that my stepfather was allowed to molest my younger sister for 2 more years after I first reported, because by the time he molested me, he had already been molesting her for a year. And that basically ruined her life. She's never really been able to come back from that. I went to my dad, who was a very flawed but wonderful and beautiful and loving individual. He wasn't a great dad, but he had his own horrible abuse story. We have generations of trauma in my family on both sides. But when the time came that I needed him, he swooped in and he absolutely was my champion. And I went to, thankfulness, feeling thankful for that. I remember him like yelling at my stepdad across the parking lot and calling him a pedophile, and like threatening to call a news, like a press conference, if they didn't like hear our case at the time that he wanted. And I mean, he was like a badass. And it was all the stuff that like I really wanted to do and I really wanted to say, but I was only 12. And, like 13, this went on from the time that I was 12 to almost 14. And I remember being embarrassed at the time, but now looking back on it, that's really the stuff that I was scared to say and scared to do. And he did it, because he was just such a badass. So I went to that, thankfulness for my dad, and also, grief, because my dad passed away about 7.5 years ago, and that has been extremely difficult for me because he was my protector, and when he died it felt like the rug was just pulled out from under me, and I didn't yet feel strong enough to protect myself, and I went into a very deep depression for about 3 years after he died. So we kind of went to a lot of different places, and I had that system of memories had a lot of stuff going on in it. And so eventually we were able to work through all of those different memories and feelings that I was having. And I forget what the affirmation was that I chose at the end. Something about being safe, or I can't remember right now what it was, but we ended with the reinstalling the affirmation, and then interestingly enough, and this video is getting like way longer than all my other videos, but whatever. Interestingly enough, last night I had one of my recurring dreams, and so I have a recurring dream about my great grandparents' property and house. It's a place that I spent a lot of time when I was a young child, and it was really one of the only safe places that I had as a child. And I have very, very positive memories associated with a lot of different parts of it, both the property, which included a creek and like all of these beautiful flowers, and a garden that my great-grandfather, my papa, kept, as well as the house, which I associate more with my great-grandmother, my granny. Everything about it was just like magical and wonderful, and my great-grandparents were these incredible people in my life who were a positive influence, always had nice things to say to me, were always kind to me, never ever abused me or even made me feel close to being abused. And I love them so much, and I loved them so much as a child. And I have this recurring dream, and when I'm not doing well, their property is not good. Like the outside is all grown up, the house is destroyed, and I'm very distraught. When things are going well, the property is in good shape and the house is in good shape. And in the last couple of dreams I've had, there are caretakers, there are people there who are living. But in every dream, I always enter from the side of the property, which would have been the driveway, which is like a dirt road. And this is in 8 Mile, Alabama, by the way. It's a real place that unfortunately is no longer owned by my family. But this time, oddly enough, I came in from the creek side. So the way that the property is that it is it's like you come in, like there's a dirt road and there's a house, and then there's like a hill that slopes down to 8 Mile Creek, which is where I was taught to swim by my papa, by my great grandfather. This time I came in from the creek, which has never happened before. So I'm looking up at the property because it like slopes up to this hill where the house is. And I'm greeted by this group of people, and I can't remember if they all live there or if some of them live there and they just had people over. I think some of them live there and they also had people over. And I'm like welcomed onto the property, you know, and I tell them who I am and what my association is with the property. And they're like super welcoming and like excited to meet me, which again has never happened. This is a completely new thing. And we walked around the property. The property's looking beautiful. You know, they're keeping, you know, they're taking good care of it. The grass is cut. The trees look good. You know, the hedges are groomed. Everything's looking really good, just the way that my papa kept it. My papa kept that place immaculate. It was incredibly beautiful. And then we went inside the house, and the house had been remodeled apparently before these people had bought it. And when they went to the house, they had found all of these, what they called antiques everywhere. And these antiques were things that I remember being in my great-grandparents' house, like an old rotary phone, some of my granny's jewelry, and they had created little like art pieces out of it. Like they were sort of installed like little installations, like you would, you know, kind of put antiques on a shelf or something like that. And I was like kind of going through and like docenting almost and being like, oh, well, this is the phone that my great grandparents used, and it used to be on their phone desk, and this is called a rotary phone. And like, oh, these are my great grandmother's earrings and her pearl necklace. And because I associate pearls with her, she wore pearls a lot. And I can't remember the other things. And I also showed them things that had been hidden by the remodel. So we were able to kind of somehow look around some of the walls, and I could show them like, oh, here's where the old wood fire stove was. And here's where this other thing was. And they were all like, oh, wow, we didn't know this about the house. Oh, this is so interesting, right? And then they showed me these boxes that they had that had more of the stuff that they had found, but that they hadn't chosen to display, but they didn't want to throw it away because they knew it was important. And I'm going through there and finding things, and I can't remember the things that I found, but like everything that I pulled out, I was like, oh, this is this thing, and this is the significance of it. And then I asked them if I could take some of this stuff home with me, and they were like, yes, of course, you can take anything home with you that you want. And I was so happy, and I'm like going through my great-grandparents' stuff. One of the things that was really sad for me was when my great-grandparents died. I lived 500 miles away, and their 3 children got together and went through their house, and like no one really knows what happened to their stuff. Some of it, they got split between the 3 children somehow, but it didn't really filter down to it didn't really filter down into the family. So I only have a couple of things from my great-grandparents' house that I absolutely treasure, but there are like specific things that I really wish that, you know, and they're not like expensive things. I mean, just things like their rotary phone or my great-grandmother's pearl earrings, you know, just there's things that I really wish that I had to remind myself of them. But anyways, I was really happy that I was like able to go through their stuff and be like, oh, this is important to me and I want to keep this. And then at some point we ended up outside again, and when we were outside I was like, oh, I really want to go see Papa's garden, because my Papa kept both a flower garden and a vegetable garden, like fruit and vegetable garden, and he kept these incredible roses, and he kept like wisteria and some tree that had, I still don't know what it is. I think I found it before. I think it might be some sort of Japanese tree, but it has little pale yellow waxy blossoms that smell like bananas. And I remember we used to call it the banana flower tree when I was a kid. And just as I was about to go and look in my Papa's garden, my kitten woke me up. So sad. But I guess my point with this is that I thought it was interesting that I had this dream the night of this EMDR session where we were trying to deal with my trust issues and being believed, and then I had this like incredibly positive dream about my great-grandparents' property. So that's where I am right now. Going forward, I have at least 2 more sessions. I have one about being put in jail when I was thrown, or Freudian slip there. I did feel thrown away when I ran away when I was 13 for very good reason. And also my trauma with giving birth. And I think that a lot of that is all tied up with bodily autonomy, as is physical abuse, sexual abuse, It's like, who's in control of my body and who gets to make decisions about my body. And I think that, again, this is why I'm so passionate about women's reproductive rights, why I've been so devastated by the Kavanaugh hearing and seeing Dr. Christina Ford being denigrated and threatened the way that she has. And it was also kind of ironic that yesterday, after this session, Kavanaugh was confirmed as a Supreme Court judge, which I don't even know what to do with yet. I can't even process it yet. It's so disheartening. And it's so disheartening to see the exact same thing happen, basically, with the Anita Hill trial, which I'm barely old enough to remember. And this trial, how long, I mean, this is almost 30 years later, right? So anyways, just another plug for, by the way, this shit continues to traumatize people who are victims of sexual abuse or survivors of sexual abuse. And trauma memories are not like other memories, and you can't expect people to be able to give you a blow-by-blow account of a traumatic event. And also, I'm looking forward to kind of getting toward the end of this EMDR journey and starting to do work with sort of rebuilding myself the way that I would like to be without all of this negative emotional connection to trauma. So thanks for watching my very, very long video. If you got to the end, as usual, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them down there, and I am happy to answer them. Have a great day, night, whatever, and thanks for watching.